I don't usually start my videos like this, but I gotta admit, one of the coolest aspects about Blue Lock is actually the fandom, specifically of how crazy the Blue Lock community is with their theories. I can't go to Twitter or Reddit or even my own comment section without getting entertained with some of the theories you guys have. However, among all the theories, among all the craziness that is known as the Blue Lock fandom, 5 theories stand above them all. These are the big 5 of the Blue Lock community theories. And here's the crazy part. Here's the part that actually blows my mind. In just the last few volumes, all of these theories came true. I mean, even if it's not straight up coming true, for the very least, they've been canonically acknowledged by the writer, meaning the writer actually delivered on the crazy theories we presented as a community. And in fact, the first theory I want to start with is the newest to get acknowledged by the writer. Hell, he even introduced one of the coolest characters in the show, Hugo, just so he can actually either prove or completely dismantle this theory. Of course, I'm talking about Isagi being a midfielder theory. Now, to be frank with you guys, I've never been a fan of this one. I mean, by the time I really took Blue Lock seriously and I got really deep into the community, this theory was actually well established. But for me, it never actually made sense. Why would a shonen show about making the best striker in the world actually not deliver on making the main character that striker? Hell, even if Isagi is not one of my favorite characters at all, even if I value players like Baro, Hugo or Lorenzo, the fact of the matter remains, I still want to see Isagi be the best striker. I still want to see a beautiful end to this story. Unless of course the writer pulls off an Eren Yeager on us and give us the biggest twist in sports anime history. However, that's not the focus of today's video. We are not here to theorize, but rather we are here to explore the confirmed theories of Blue Lock. And so for that reason, and even though I am not a fan of Isagi being a midfielder, I am going to play the devil's advocate. I am going to present the logic behind this theory and why it actually has merit despite me hating this theory. And so let's begin. Now, the first argument and the biggest selling point to this theory is rather the fact that Isagi plays as a midfielder when he is still figuring out how to score. He has always done this ever since the first selection. He always knew how to leverage geniuses in order to prove his worth. And this is where I feel the bulk of this theory stands on. Because you see, Isagi never had an issue of being a cam for geniuses, until of course he figures out how he can score for himself. And in doing so, he switches from playing cam for geniuses to actually devouring them and stand on an equal footing with them as a striker. And this has always been the case for Isagi, until the Uber's game where he completely took the mantle of a striker, where he completely infiltrated Kaiser's brain and started scoring left and right. However, even still, even after unlocking Metavision and dominating as a striker, Isagi still pulls off his amazing performance by leveraging other players. I mean, for example, against Rin and Shido, Isagi leveraged Kaiser and still barely won that game. In fact, he only won because he was able to leverage another geniuses into the equation. He was able to leverage Ness's mental state. But this actually leads me to think of something. This leads me to believe that there is a chance in the near future that there will be a level where Isagi can no longer leverage other players, where he can no longer utilize the geniuses and talented learners around him in order to be the best striker. However, where things get interesting is with the fact that we could be at that wall. Of course, I am referring to Hugo and how he completely shut down Isagi. I mean, look at it this way. The NEL definitely opened our eyes to the level of the outer world. However, we still did not see what Sai saw. We still did not get to experience what made Sai give up on his dream. We still did not see how Bunny and Loki are when they are pushed. I mean, not even that. Loki, while not taking the game seriously whatsoever, almost made Isagi and Kaiser cry. And so I can only imagine how scary he would be when he is frustrated or when he is threatened. Which, by the way, this could mean that Sai did not simply lose, but rather he actually fought and fought again. However, when he pushed an insane genius like Bunny, he ended up showing him what Hugo is warning Isagi about. But this is why I am going to stop with playing the devil's advocate. I feel like this is where it gets a little bit frustrating for me, because as much as I love Hugo, as much as I love how beefy he is, as much as I love how insanely intelligent he is, I feel like his line of thinking is a little bit limiting. I mean, don't get me wrong, I am not expecting a lion to fly, But as you all know, humans actually fly without wings. And what I am leading with this, I feel like Isagi is a striker. As I said, he is the main character of a show about strikers, and so he can't be anything but that. And also, this idea of him not being able to deal with real geniuses like Loki or Bunny shits on the whole premise of the show. It undermines the battles Isagi took, and the people he had to devour and get devoured by in order to reach this level. But more importantly, it actually undermines how he made geniuses kneel. It undermines the fact that most of the geniuses strikers in Blue Lock are actually all rivals to Isagi, and they all respect him and they all know that he earned that respect. However, before I dive any deeper into this, I actually have a full-fledged theory on this topic specifically, which will actually end up blowing up your minds completely, and so please stay tuned for that video. For now, I am going to explain why the writer might be acknowledging the theory of Isagi being a midfielder, but at the same time that acknowledgement is a plot device meant to prove for everyone that Isagi is not a midfielder. And by the way, this is not just a one-way street. You see, Hugo does not need to be wrong. Hugo could be onto something, and his theory could be the perfect theory in order to reach Noah. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to understand that Noah is the most suitable for that position he is in. And simply put, much like Hugo said it, Noah does not feel any pressure from being the #1 player. But where am I actually going with this? Why do I think that even if Hugo's theory is correct, it still does not make Isagi a midfielder by definition, and he is definitely fit to be a striker? Because you see, Hugo describes it as such. He describes his suitability theory as the law of nature. If you are suitable for that environment, you are meant to thrive. But going back to the best geniuses in Blue Lock, actually respecting Isagi and acknowledging him as their rival. Think about it this way, making Shido and Ren understand that Isagi is a striker is a very hard ordeal. I mean, Shido at first did not even look at Isagi twice, however he ended up liking his playing style, while on the other hand, Ren always deemed Isagi as inferior to him, only for the latter to force him to call him a rival. However, if Ren and Shido are hard to convince, Baro is actually impossible. And so I ask you guys, what would be the reason for these hard-headed geniuses to consider Isagi as a striker? And here's my reasoning for that. Isagi has an intangible weapon that allows him to go toe-to-toe with geniuses. And that weapon is simply adaptability. I feel like adaptability on its own is a trait of all the talented learners. They all witness, analyze, and then adapt. However, Isagi takes this to the extreme. The guy actually makes a living from adapting to insane players, specifically geniuses. And so I feel like this special adaptability that is meant to counter insane players is actually the X factor behind Isagi's performance. But there is a counter argument for this. Why wouldn't Hugo be able to see that? I mean, if Baro, Bachira, Ren, Shido all saw this, why wouldn't Hugo be able to see that? You see, despite him actually dissecting everything through logic, at the end of the day, logic can never account for unpredictability, and by extension, it can never account for adaptability. Isagi having that X factor, and having that insane adaptability that enables him to stand toe-to-toe with geniuses, is actually a trait that Hugo could not account for, but it is one that enables him to be on the first category, the category of the players that they believe themselves to be the best strikers in the making. And so I feel like if there is a talented learner that could break from the second position to the first, I feel like it's going to be Isagi. And here's the thing, I'm not the only one who believes in Isagi like this. Sai also believes in Isagi a lot. You see, after Isagi adapted to the distortion between Sai and Ren, and after he escaped Aiko and scored, I feel like Sai actually understood something. He understood in that moment, unlike himself, Isagi actually has what it takes to face off against the geniuses. It means that there is an X factor to Isagi that would enable him to be on the side of the characters going to be the #1 strikers. And honestly, this will be the best acknowledgement we get from the writer regarding any theory from the fans. However, and since we were on the topic of Sai, the next theory has his name written all over it. However, this one is a little bit special because it is the most common theory in the community. I mean, even the most casual of fans have had this theory run through their minds when they saw Sai when he came back from Spain. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to ask the question of what the hell happened to Sai Itoshi. Or to be more precise, it's actually who the hell happened to Sai Itoshi when he was in Spain, who completely destroyed Sai's dream of becoming the best striker. However, here's the thing, despite this theory being as strong as it gets since the beginning, it actually got much bigger and more intriguing towards the end of the PXG game. Once we had the difference between geniuses and talented learners, and once we understand that geniuses mutate violently, and when this happens, they usually leave the talented learners in a state of despair. They leave them at the wall of evolution. And so at that point, it actually became crystal clear that any player that would be able to destroy Sai completely must have been a genius. Not only that, he must have been one of the craziest geniuses we've seen as of yet. I mean, frankly, with Kaiser and Isagi, it took both Berserker, Rin, and Loki for them to actually kneel. And so someone who I assume is as talented as Kaiser and Isagi must have faced a genius of that level. And to be honest, at first I thought it was someone within Real. I mean, it definitely makes sense that way, since that could be the player that completely outshined Sai and never really allowed the Japanese emperor to do anything. And in fact, I went into specifics and I even thought that it was Luna. I mean, sure, he was a little bit old to ever play on the same league as Sai, but seeing just how petty he is against Rin and the other Blue Lockers, I couldn't help but think that he might have done it just so he can have a little bit of fun. However, the writer actually chose to prove this theory in a much better manner. You see, instead of this new crazy genius being a member of Real, he actually had him to be the rising star of their rival team, FC Barca. And so the writer was able to keep him make sense. And at the same time, much like it was the case with Loki and Berserker Rin, he actually made it come from adversity and not any type of rivalry. However, nonetheless, Bunny was so glorious. The writer actually more than delivered with Bunny. In fact, it is just like the previous theory with Hugo. Because you see, Bunny has one of the coolest designs in Blue Lock. Not only is he tall, not only is he beefy, and not only is he a high flyer, he also has that scar on his face. And I mean, if this does not get us excited about his matchup against Sai and potentially Rin, I don't know what could. This guy right here represents everything right about Blue Lock. A genius with an insane design and an insane weapon to go along with it, destroying a poor talented learner. However, and speaking of the similarity between Hugo and Bunny, I feel like this theory could have another layer. You see, it was never mentioned where Hugo actually plays, and judging by the fact that he is one of the best New Gen 11s, one could actually assume that he played for Real, and his mentality that is all about idealism and suitability could have played a huge role in convincing Sai to turn into a midfielder. I mean, think about it this way. After getting completely dismantled by Bunny, Hugo throws the lifeline towards Sai. However, that line is not completely innocent, because Hugo's mentality and his way of actually describing it could have been the final nail in Sai's dream's coffin. And again, if Sai got completely destroyed by Bunny, while Hugo was managing himself just fine, I think Hugo's rationality and his very logical arguments might have been the ones to completely sway Sai Itoshi. However, and speaking of Hugo's logic and his rational thinking, the next theory is all about the man of the hour, Noel Noah. Now, to be honest, this one is very special to me, since despite it being not that big of a theory, the twist that came with it might actually be the biggest twist in all of Blue Lock. I mean, having Noah turn on Isagi like that is just crazy. And what's even crazier is that he did not turn on him because Isagi is bad or that he is doing wrong. Well, Noah just turned on him because he doesn't see a rival in him. And I feel like at this point, it's time for me to give credit to the woman who started this theory in the first place. Of course, I'm talking about Serena. She's a fellow YouTuber that makes kick-ass videos, and so I highly recommend you guys subscribe to her. Because her theory of how Noel Noah could not be trusted is not just on point, but actually proved how much of a big brain she has. I mean, in her video, she really had Noah's number. Why would a guy who only cares about results be that friendly with Isagi? Unless, of course, he had an agenda. And here's the thing, when it comes to Noah choosing Kaiser, it's actually not about talent. For Noah, it really didn't matter whether be it Isagi or Kaiser. As long as he has a rival like Loki, he is fine with either player. And this is confirmed by his reaction to Isagi unlocking Metavision. Isagi was already great at off-the-ball plays. However, Metavision shot him to the next level, and Noah could not hold his excitement seeing Isagi play like that. However, following that game, following the Manshine City game, the moment Isagi heard a compliment from Noah, he actually embraced his fanboy personality. mentality. And you can see the moment Noah lost complete hope in Isagi, because as you can see, Isagi being a fanboy of Noah means that he would never see him as a true rival, and so Noah completely lost interest. However, this does not mean that Isagi remains with no use. The guy is able to score and is able to push Kaiser, and so logically speaking, Noah did the only right thing for himself and he used Isagi to push Kaiser towards that level. And another confirmation for this would be the fact that he was so impressed by Baro turning on Snuffy that he actually wanted the same thing for himself. He went as far as telling Snuffy that Baro has the best mentality for strikers, because Baro did not accept Snuffy's retirement, but rather he wants to face the best in the world. He wants to dominate in the highest of stages, meaning when it comes to mentality, Baro is exactly on point. However, and I know I make it seem to be obvious, but trust me when I tell you guys, this theory was not famous for a reason. No one actually saw beyond Noah, me included. And I honestly feel ashamed because Noah is my second favorite character and the player I admire the most in this show, and so I should have at least known. But I actually never reached this conclusion on my own, and all credits for the community actually enjoying this theory goes back to Serena. However, one theory that I think is the opposite of this one, where almost everyone saw coming, is actually Nagi's downfall. I mean, ever since we were introduced to him, Nagi seemed like that genius character who would actually be insane at first, but fades into obscurity as the show advances. And sure enough, this very thing ended up being true. I mean, sure, he should come back, but he should have had a downfall, especially when you look at it from this perspective. The writer is always delivering a story and wisdom behind his characters and their interactions, and Nagi of course being no exception. I mean, someone like Nagi, who is just riding the coattails of his genius, is definitely bound to get his ass handed to him once his genius is not that special. And so the writing was always on the wall for Nagi. His downfall was just inevitable, and the majority of the community actually knew that. The ones who didn't are either in denial or simply did not care that much about Blue Lock to begin with. And speaking of caring about Blue Lock, one of the things that actually sold me on this show is in fact the way Isagi handled Kira in the first volume. Having the character who has the traits to become the second main character of the show getting completely destroyed in the first episode by none other than the main character is just a testament to how crazy Blue Lock's hook is. And it is no wonder it is as famous as right now. However, where am I getting with this? Well, you see, the theory of Kira coming back is actually one of the longest standing theories in the community. Now, it's not as famous as the Nagi and Sai's theories, however, it is a well-known theory in the fandom. And in all honesty, the premise behind it just did not make sense up until this point. I mean, especially after the second selection and how fast the players were getting locked off. I felt like Kira must have faded into obscurity. However, a lot of people still believe that he will make his comeback. And what do you know, while focusing on Nagi's comeback story, we actually got introduced to Kira, meaning this canonically happened. Even if Kira fails again, it really doesn't matter, simply because he returned to the main scene. And as far as this theory go, I think it is valid. However, this theory is a little bit interesting because even though sure Kira returned, we still don't know anything about him. I mean, at least with Bunny, we knew that he is a high flyer and we know he is an insane genius with a very dark past. However, for this theory, we have no idea of what Kira is about to do. However, for now, I am happy that the writer actually acknowledged this theory as well. And as I said at the beginning of the video, these are the craziest of theories and they were all revealed at the same time. Well, almost at the same time, there were a few volumes in between. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.